Welcome to the Arizona Civics Podcast and our series, Understanding State and Local Government, a 10-part mini-lecture series exploring Arizona's history, governance, and civic life. This podcast is designed to provide clear, engaging insights into topics like judicial selection, tribal sovereignty, and direct democracy. Our content expert, Dr. Sean Bienberg, a Phoenix native and scholar of state and federal constitutions, brings deep expertise to this series. Dr. Bienberg serves as the Associate Director of ASU's School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership and is the Director of the Center for American Civics. He is also author of Prohibition, the Constitution, and States' Rights, as well as Progressive States' Rights. Let's dive into the systems and stories that shape Arizona's civic life.
Fundamental difference between the United States Constitution and the Arizona Constitution is that the United States Constitution is one of limited, enumerated, and specific powers. In other words, the burden of proof is on the federal government to show that it has the authority to act. And under U.S. constitutional federalism, that bias is reversed for the state governments. So that is to say that the state is presumed to be able to act unless you have specifically told it otherwise. And so that means that the first thing that will jump out at folks as they look at both of these constitutions is that the Arizona Constitution is much, much longer. Citizens of Arizona have to be much more specific in restricting the powers of the state government if it's something that they don't want it to do. They have to consciously remove that in a way that they don't at the federal level. Moreover, the Arizona Constitution, like other state constitutions, often has a lot of language in which the citizens have specified particular policy preferences that they want to see implemented. So, for example, the Arizona Constitution, like pretty much all the state constitutions, has an affirmative guarantee that the state will provide a public education. And so that is then listed and spelled out sort of some of the particulars of what that might look like. Whereas, again, by contrast, the U.S. Constitution tends to be more of a list of powers, relatively few policy mandates and policy implementations. So that's probably the most significant difference between the two of them. There are some others, of course, particularly the Arizona Constitution has a lot of features of direct democracy. So citizen lawmaking in terms of citizens proposing laws through the initiative, or citizens being able to block laws through a referendum, or to remove or to remove an official by a recall. None of those are present in the U.S. constitutional system, in which removal of officials is either impeachment or expulsion, or simply just failing to reelect somebody. So one of the major differences as well is that the Arizona Constitution is designed to be very flexible, whereas the U.S. Constitution is designed to be more static. That is to say, the Arizona Constitution emphasizes direct responsiveness to the voters, and the U.S. Constitution is much more cautious about ensuring that there is a consensus and broad buy-in across the country in order to make a significant change to the constitutional order. Some have argued, in fact, this is quite a good complement to each other insofar as the U.S. Constitution can't be changed without a broad geographic, cross-ideological, cross-regional consensus, whereas the Arizona Constitution, again, is designed to be much more responsive to the people, because you can also do much less damage. If Arizonans pass some dumb amendment, it can be removed relatively easily on the back end. So this is a broad difference of political philosophy. The Arizona Constitution is designed to be much, much more flexible, much, much more responsive, much, much more directly democratic than the U.S. Constitution, which prioritizes deliberation and consensus before you're able to make a change. So state constitutions in general are often quite different from the U.S. Constitution. Like the U.S. Constitution, they often reflect the time and the place in which they were composed, also reflective particularly of attitudes or values within a particular region. Some states have had many constitutions. Arizona, by virtue of being one of the younger states, has had only one, although its constitution has been amended very, very significantly because of its ease of amendment process. Now, one thing that's quite striking is that state constitutions often shape each other and often shape constitutions that come later. So an example of this that I often like to point to is what one consider one of the earliest state constitutions is the Virginia Declaration of Rights that George Mason writes in 1776, which is not only an inspiration for Thomas Jefferson in composing the Declaration of Independence, but often has language that is often incorporated into other state constitutions of the time, which then get copied into state constitutions built in the 19th century. And quite strikingly, there's some language that comes almost exactly from George Mason in the Arizona Constitution's Declaration of Rights. So you literally see this interesting trajectory from the very, very first state constitution through the last contiguous state constitution to get formed. So other state constitutions are sometimes experimental, and states decide they don't want to copy them. So at the time of the founding, Pennsylvania's constitution is very directly democratic, very much prioritizes efficiency and responsiveness, not so much deliberation or liberty. And a couple states copy this, but over the course of the late 18th and early 19th century, other states decide this is not the model to use. And so they move away from that. And the US Constitution moves away from that model to one which requires more consensus. And I bring up the example of Pennsylvania because in some ways, the founders of Arizona's Constitution, while not explicitly citing it, looked to the ideas and values that it used in terms of maximizing accountability to the voters and maximizing direct democracy. So the Arizona Constitution writers use different mechanisms to achieve that, but ultimately they use a very similar objective that they're trying to pursue, which is part of why Arizona's Constitution is controversial when it's being drafted, is because some look to it as effectively almost a repudiation of the lessons of the 19th century and the late 18th century in terms of making sure constitutions work more carefully constraining governments and ensuring that the people themselves could not become tyrannical. Whereas the founders of Arizona's Constitution, like the founders of the Pennsylvania Constitution, assumed that the people themselves almost would never be tyrannical, or at least would be very, very reluctant to become so.
Come up with constitutions just like...
Thank you for joining us. This series is brought to you by the Center for American Civics at ASU, where we're working to make Arizona a national model for civic education. Special thanks to our content expert, Dr. Sean Byenberg, for his insights. Follow us on social media to stay connected and share your thoughts. We are on social media at ASU Civics on pretty much every platform. Don't forget to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep learning.